A woman I worked with many years ago came out of her performance review almost in tears. Her numbers were strong, her team rated her highly. She had delivered every project she had been given, and a few that no one even had asked her to take on. And the feedback she received was just one line: "You need more executive presence." Well, that was it. No example, no definition, no description of what was missing or what more would look like. So she walked out of that room more confused than when she walked in, because she had no idea what she was supposed to do differently on Monday morning. If you have ever been told you need more executive presence and left the conversation with nothing concrete to work with, well, this episode is for you. Welcome back to Women Leading Beyond Bias. I'm Sandra D'Souza, founder of Elect, and this is the show where we talk about the realities women face navigating leadership, career growth, and entrepreneurship without the slogans, without the cheerleading, and without pretending the rules are fair. Well, today's episode is about a phrase that gets used more than almost any other in leadership conversations and explained less than almost any other: executive presence. Now, let's start with what the research tells us, because I think it helps to know that you are not imagining how vague this conversation is. The Center for Talent Innovation did a well-known study on executive presence a few years ago. They surveyed senior executives and asked them what they meant when they used the term. The senior executives agreed on three broad components: gravitas, communication, and appearance. But when you ask them to describe what those things actually look like in practice, the answers were all over the place. One executive's gravitas was another executive's too quiet. One leader's polished communication was another leader's too rehearsed. The study also found something else worth paying attention to. Women received feedback about their executive presence more often than men did, and the feedback they received was more frequently about appearance and tone than about substance. Things like the pitch of a voice, whether someone smiled too much or not enough, whether they took up too much space in the meeting or not enough. And McKinsey's Women in the Workplace research has tracked something related for over a decade now. Women, particularly women of color, received more feedback that is vague, personality-based, and difficult to act on. Men, on average, received more feedback that is specific, skills-based, and tied to a clear next step. So when a woman is told she needs more executive presence, two things usually happen at the same time. The first is that there really is something the decision makers in the room are responding to. Presence is real, it is observable, it does shape how people read you. The second is that the person giving the feedback often cannot articulate what that something is. They feel it, they cannot name it. So they reach for a phrase that sounds substantive, lets them avoid the harder work of being specific. Both of these things can be true at once, and both of them affect how women experience this feedback. I have watched this play out for hundreds of women. A senior leader is told, often during promotion conversations, that she's technically excellent but needs to develop more presence. She goes away and tries to fix it. She buys a different style of jacket. She practices speaking more slowly. She takes a public speaking course. She tries to be more assertive in meetings. And then someone tells her she's being too assertive. And then she pulls back. And then someone tells her she's too quiet again. So, and then, I guess the loop just continues. What I've noticed is that the women who eventually crack this are not the women who try harder to perform presence. They are the women who stop trying to perform anything and instead get very clear about what presence actually signals to the people in the room. Because here is what I think presence really is. Executive presence is the moment a decision maker decides whether you can be trusted with something bigger than what you are doing now. That is it. That is the whole thing. Yeah? Let that sit with you. It is not about your voice. It is not about your jacket. It is not about whether you stand a certain way at the head of the table. It is the answer to a question that decision makers are running quietly in the back of their minds. Can I trust this person with a bigger team, a bigger budget, a bigger problem, a bigger room? Will she hold up when it gets harder? Will she represent us well to the board, to the client, to the regulator? When someone tells you that you need more presence, what they are usually saying, even if they cannot articulate it, is that they are not yet sure of the answer to that question. That is uncomfortable to bear, or it is uncomfortable to hear. But it is also useful because once you understand what is actually being assessed, you can stop chasing those sort of like surface signals and start working on what really matters. The first thing presence signals is calm, not detachment, not coldness, calm. Decision makers are watching to see how you behave when something goes wrong. When the numbers slip, when the client is angry, when the question in the meeting is the one you were not expecting, when someone more senior than you challenges your work in front of other people. If you become flustered, defensive, apologetic, or visibly anxious in those moments, the room reads it. Even if your work is excellent, the room starts to wonder, what would happen in a bigger version of that moment with more at stake? If you stay steady, if your voice does not change pitch, if you do not over-explain, if you do not rush to fill the silence, if you can say, I do not have that number with me, I will come back to you at the end of the day, without flinching, the room also reads that. Now, a helpful first step can be to notice the moments where you currently lose composure. Not to judge yourself for them, but to map them. For some women, it is about being interrupted. For others, it is being challenged on numbers. For others, it also can be about praise. They get flustered when someone gives them positive feedback in front of senior people. Whatever it is, you cannot work on it until you know where it lives. The women I have seen develop the strongest presence are not the women who never feel anxious. They are the women who have learned to feel anxious without showing it, and who have built a small set of phrases that they can reach for in the moments when they used to freeze. Things like, that is a fair question, and I want to give you a proper answer rather than a quick one. Can I come back to you tomorrow with a full picture? Or, I do not agree, and I would like to walk you through why. Or sometimes simply a pause, a real pause, not a filler, and not an just a breath, and then a clear sentence. Calm is not a performance, it is a practice, and the room can tell the difference. The second thing presence signals is clarity. Decision makers are watching to see whether you can take something complicated and make it understandable to people who do not have the time or sometimes the expertise to follow every detail. So this is where a lot of senior women get caught, particularly women who have built their careers on technical depth. They're so close to the work that they want to honor all of its complexity. So when they are asked a question in a meeting, they answer with all of the nuance, all of the caveats, all of the qualifications. And then the room reads that as a lack of conviction. I'm not saying that this is fair. The reality is that women who hedge are often hedging for very good reasons. They have been punished in the past for being too definitive. They have learned that being wrong is more expensive for them compared to their male peers. So they pad their language, they soften their statements, they add the qualifier before they add the point. But the cost of that pattern is high because the room registers the hedging long before it registers the substance. Now, a helpful first step that can be to practice leading with the answer. If someone asks you what you think, the first sentence out of your mouth should be your answer, not the context, not the caveats, not the disclaimer, the answer. I think we should pause the launch. My recommendation is to take the deal. I do not think that this is the right hire. Then you give the reasoning, and then you give the nuance, then you can give the conditions under which you might change your mind. But the room needs to hear the position first. I have seen women change how they are perceived in a matter of weeks just by reordering the sentences that they were already saying. Same content, different order, completely different read. Clarity is not the same as oversimplifying. It is the discipline of knowing what your position is, saying it first, and trusting the room to ask follow-up questions if they want the depth. The third thing presence signals, and this is the one that takes the longest to build, is judgment. Decision makers are watching to see whether you know what matters and what does not, whether you can tell the difference between a 5-minute decision and a 5-month decision, whether you can read a room, whether you understand the politics without being political, whether you can hold the strategic picture and the operational detail at the same time and know which one to talk about, with whom and when. Judgment is hard to teach. You cannot take a course in it. You cannot read a book that gives you a checklist for it. It is built over years of being in the rooms, watching what works and what does not, and slowly developing your own sense of when to push and when to wait. But there is something I have noticed about the women who develop strong judgment faster than their peers. They ask better questions in private than they do in public. What I mean is this. Before a big meeting, before a board paper, before a sensitive conversation, they have already asked a small number of trusted people the question they're about to walk into. Not to be told what to do, to stress test their own thinking, to find the angle they have not considered, to check whether their read of the politics is accurate. This is where networks become a real asset. Not networks of people who will applaud you, networks of people who will tell you when you are wrong or when you're about to walk into something you have not seen. A helpful first step can be to identify 3 or 4 people you can call before a high-stakes moment, not after. Not when you're venting, before, when you can still change the course. Those people are not your friends in the social sense, they are your thinking partners in the professional sense. And the women who have those people, in my experience, develop sharper judgment faster than the women who go it alone. The other thing I have noticed about judgment is that it shows up in what women choose not to say. The senior women I admire most are not the women who speak the most in a meeting. They are the women who speak when it counts and stay quiet when it does not. They have learned that every time they speak, they are spending a small piece of the room's attention, and they are careful about how they spend it. This is the opposite of the advice many women have been given for years, which is to speak up more often, to take up more space, make sure you are heard. That advice is not wrong, but it's just incomplete. Speaking more is only useful when what you are saying is worth hearing. Otherwise, it can work against you. So, a second helpful first step is to ask yourself, before you speak in a meeting, whether you're about to say moves the conversation forward or whether you are speaking because you feel you should be contributing. Both are valid reasons to feel the urge to speak. Only one of them is a reason to actually do it. And when you walk into a room with that kind of preparation behind you, the room can feel it. It does not feel like polish, it feels like substance. And that is what presence really is. Now, at Elect, we use a framework called PRISM: presence, relationships, impact, skill set, mindset. It is a framework that runs through almost everything we teach. And as you can hear, the P stands for presence for a reason. But what I hope this episode makes clear is that presence in the PRISM sense is not about how you look or how you sound. It's about working three things together. Calm under pressure, which is mostly a mindset practice. Clarity in communication, which is mostly a skill set practice. And judgment in the moment, which grows out of relationships. The people who help you stress test your thinking before you walk into the room. So when we say women need to develop their presence, what we really mean is that presence is the visible result of work that is happening across the rest of the framework. You cannot fake it, you cannot perform it, you build it, and then the room starts to feel it. That is also why the feedback, "you need more presence," is so frustrating. It points at the surface without naming the foundation. And the women who eventually develop strong presence are the ones who stop working on the surface and start working on the foundation. Before I close, I want to leave you with a question to think about this week. The next time you are in a meeting that matters, notice one thing. Notice the moment when you feel yourself shift, the moment your shoulders tighten, or your voice changes, or you start over-explaining, or you stop speaking altogether. That moment is the moment to study, not to fix immediately, just to notice what triggered it. What were you afraid of? What were you trying to avoid? Because that moment, repeated across enough meetings, is the moment the room is reading. And once you know where it lives, you can begin the actual work, which again is not the work of performing presence. It is the work of becoming someone who can hold steady in that moment, speak clearly through it, and trust her own judgment about what to say next. Now, that is the work that changes how a room reads you. And it is work that no one can do for you, but it is also work that in my experience, every woman is capable of doing once she stops chasing the wrong thing. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this episode was useful, the most generous thing you can do is share it with one woman in your life who has been told she needs more presence and was not given anything to do with that feedback. She will know what I mean. Next week, we are going to talk about something closely related. Why so many women wait until they feel ready before they step forward, and the cost of that hesitation. It is called Say Yes Before You Feel Ready. And I think it will be a useful follow-on to what we have talked about today. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I will see you next week. This is Sandra D'Souza, and you have been listening to Women Leading Beyond Bias.